Nothing like starting with genetics and folate in the morning, huh? Yeah. Well, welcome to my alma mater. I love this place, and I haven't been here since I struggled through 3 days of gruesome clinical board exams. But I made it. What do you call a medical student who graduates at the bottom of their class? Not that I did. A doctor. So, dirty genes. Concept is simple. Many are thinking that their genes, if you're born with SNPs or you're born with genetic defects, that you're in trouble. That's not true. You can be in trouble, yes. There are some genes that are definitely a big issue. There's other genes, about 19,000 of them, that if there are no defects, the environment, your mindset, food, all these play a huge role in how your genes function. Vitamins and nutrients, or the lack thereof. So we have to keep in mind how malleable our genes are. So just because you're born with a bad set doesn't mean you're doomed, and just because you're born with a clean set doesn't mean you're going to live forever. Who's that guy who smoked like crazy and drank like crazy, who lived to 100 and some years old? Famous George Burns, was that it? Right? Winston Churchill too? Well, that's cool. He deserved to live a long time. This couple had a beautiful baby boy named Hugo. Now, it wasn't easy. Just a year and a half ago, prior to Hugo being born, they had a baby born with no skull. Obviously, that does not work, and so they lost their baby. They contacted me and said, look, we both have empty Jafar. We had a significant baby with birth defects that did not survive. We're very nervous about trying again. Shall we try again? I said, well, I believe with the right tools that you can have a very healthy baby. And they did, and this was the result. But it was a struggle. It was not easy, and they were terrified. But we made some major life differences. But the result is phenomenal. Now, I have 3 amazing boys. I didn't work hard at it. In fact, oops was said 3 times. And every time was on vacation. So I've stopped traveling. That's why I do presentations now at home. I live here in Seattle. No, but seriously, why is it that I have 3 amazing boys without any difficulty, and my wife as well, yet the prior couple had significant difficulties? Is it just genetics? Well, they definitely played a role. But I have MTHFR as well, and so does my wife. And thus, so do my boys. The environment is a really big thing to look at. And it's one that we forget to even look at because we're so busy at screens and food and supplements that we forget that our surroundings are extremely important. This is where my wife grew up, literally. So this is about 5 minutes from her home, and this is in Russia. And this elevation is about sea level. She's really close to the Baltic Sea. And what do you see here? Well, birch trees, vegetation, low altitude. Yes, there's a lot of sun in the summer, but the rest of the year you got very little sun. This is me traveling. This was with my end of my junior year at this institution. I did not know what I was going to do, so I pulled the plug out of studies and I traveled the world. India, I'm up here at about 10,000 feet. There's not much vegetation. There's less oxygen. There is pretty pristine air. So my environment here is pretty good, but there are some elements which are, stressful to the body. Now here I am in outback Australia. Yes, I was a cowboy. Now I'm a doctor, go figure. But this environment, very, very hostile. Again, pretty low level, but scorching, hot sun during the day, and at night it's freezing, absolutely freezing. In Australia, if you've been there, they have burn times. Even the announcers on the radio, between songs, they say, time to roll over, time to apply more sunscreen, because the UV radiation there is very, very strong. So again, the environment plays a role. Food. This is at my wife's cabin in Russia. What are we growing? Vegetables, plants. Okay? So this is their main source of food, and they grow their own food because the family was really poor. And so they didn't go out to the store and buy stuff that's perfectly, colored and shaped and so on. It's full of issues, but my son there is on the left with his cousin Pauline on the right, and they're eating real strawberries that were grown at the right time of year without nasty chemicals. Now, here I am on that Australian ranch, and it was 1.5 million acres to hold only about 12,000 cattle. Why? Because there's little vegetation. Nothing can really grow out here. There's very little water. Now, I arrived on this station by chance. Well, it was a lot of work to get the job, but I managed. But I arrived as a vegetarian. And I told the camp cook, who was an alcoholic and grumpy, swear I could have made a reality show out of this. And I said, I'm a vegetarian. First of all, I'm an American in the middle of nowhere. And then I demand that he cooks vegetarian, and there's no vegetation. So, and there's nothing. Everything was flown into this place. Mail was flown in, doctors were flown in. So there was 7 employees on 1.5 million acres in the center of the outback. So I lost my vegetarianism. 3 meals a day, we ate meat. Now we're back in America. We were in Russia, we were in Australia, now we're in America. This is our food. And this is where it goes. We have beautiful packaging and great commercials. Genes. Now, this is pretty intense biochemistry and genetics. The little bubbles are genes, but my point is that all of us in this room are about 99% to 99.9% identical. That much. That's very, very similar. So what is it here in these genes that makes us slightly different? So every one of us has some slight variation in those little bubbles. That full R2, DHFR, MTHFR, there's some slight variation in there. But the functions remain the same. But they may act faster, they may act slower, and then there's things which influence those said genes. But most of us are 99 to 99.9 genetically identical. So why did we introduce folic acid? Our ancestors didn't have folic acid, so why do we need folic acid? Well, because we have neural tube defects, and we have the science, and we said, hey, if there's neural tube defects, that must be a folate deficiency. So let's fix it by making a synthetic nutrient called folic acid and insert it in every single damn food that we have available and give it to everyone, because we've done the research. Well, I agree with that, right? There's a huge public health crisis. Try to solve it. Totally cool with that. Now, sorry for the gruesome image, but a lot of people don't understand what a neural tube defect is. So yeah, I hit you with it. This is significant. Now, neural tube defect, congenital heart defect, extra nipples. Imagine growing up with extra nipples as a kid. Then you have hypospadias. You have cleft palate, tongue tie. All these things are related to folate and methylation, not folic acid. Now, the baby on the right is what Hugo's brother had. He did not live. He had no skull. So there are different levels of severity. And I challenge the notion that pregnancy and all these midline defects are just a range of how severe the methylation and folate dysfunction is. So congenital heart defect, serious. Neural tube defect, serious. Having no skull, serious. Miscarriage, more serious. Down syndrome, more serious. It's a spectrum. Now, why does this happen? Why are we having these midline defects? Well, because we figured, hey, we don't want to be making bread fresh every day. Let's strip everything out of the wheat so it's shelf stable. It doesn't mold, it doesn't decay. It can sit there for 10 years and we can sell it more efficiently. It's good for business. We can grow a tremendous amount of grain and store it. So that's what we've done. We removed the whole grain, the bran, the middlings, whatever they are, the wheat germ oil, and we are left with garbage. So the solution is to enrich our garbage food with a garbage nutrient. That's pretty clever. Who has read the book, The Case Against Sugar? Scary. I highly recommend you guys read that book, and ladies. Phenomenal book. Cigarettes weren't addictive until they soaked the tobacco in sugar. Then they soaked the tobacco in sugar. It allowed the smoke to get in the lungs, hit them with more nicotine in the brain. Wow, who knew? Enriched flour. Enriched flour. What did our ancestors eat? Wheat? Not really. They ate real food, right? They didn't even grow wheat. I'm not a paleo expert. I'm not going to step on anyone's toes there, but I know they didn't eat enriched flour. But what do we do? Look at this. This was a comment on some food critic's blog, a food critic. And she said this stuff gives me a high five to my taste buds. Yes, please. Although I'm pretty sure the sensation is more of a scalding one than a high five slap. But whatever. It's true. The fast food industry gets it. Food science, probably taught here in this lovely campus, gets it. They understand that if you make food like this, it's addictive and it hits your dopamine receptors and you want more, despite the fact that you know it's going to give you more of a scalding effect. We all know that. I mean, how many of us go for that treat or the alcohol or those things which spike our dopamine, yet we know we shouldn't do it? I do it, and I know I read all the science, and I still do it. Did you know that winter wheat has over 2 million pounds of Roundup sprayed on it every year? Why? Are there weeds growing on winter wheat? No. They do it because in the winter, the wheat doesn't ripen faster. So you can't harvest a green plant, right? You got to have the seed fully mature. So if you spray it with Roundup, it dies and the seed matures really, really quickly. Now, this is not an approved use of Roundup, but it's done a lot. Thankfully, only 14% of planted wheat does this, but they use a massive amount of Roundup. Food Babe I took the slide out for the sake of time, which I probably shouldn't have because now I'm talking about it anyway, but Food Babe, if you Google Food Babe Roundup PDF in foods, she'll show you how much parts per billion and parts per million that Roundup is in everyday foods. Yes, even organic. Folate. Folate. Foliage. Green stuff. This is what our ancestors eat. Hopefully it's what we eat. Because after all, evolution takes a long time. We haven't evolved to use folic acid yet. It was only introduced in the late 80s, but yet we're all consuming it. This is what we should be consuming. Folate is foliage. Comes from the Latin word folium. Folic acid, I beg to differ, is not folate. My source of the information above is on the bottom. So these are full papers. If you guys want to dig deeper in the research and make sure I'm not pulling this out of my arse, this is from PubMed, National Library of Medicine. Methylfolate, who's heard of it? Okay. It's the main circulating form of folate, making up over 80% of your folate in your blood. Now, it said it should be. It's not. It should be. Why? Because this is what most people are getting, and also in their food. If you look at here, it says folate. parentheses, as folic acid. Look at what is inside of the parentheses on your supplements. Inside the parentheses is what you should be paying attention to, not the first word. Yes, those are all big words and we just glaze over them, but you should start learning that, because if you're swallowing it, you need to know what it's doing. And then pay attention to the other ingredients on the bottom, because yes, you need propylene glycol and propylparaben in your multivitamin because you are deficient in that. Genetic control. Let's talk about this for a second. Substrate is the stuff. It's the raw material goods. The end product is the finished product. Say you're a steel manufacturer and you make, well, let's say you're a shovel manufacturer and you need steel to make the shovel. So the steel is the substrate, the end product is the spade, the very end. The cofactor is the heat, it's the fire, it's also the oxygen. Genes can have multiple cofactors, not just one. MTHFR has a couple. So the steel comes in, goes through the machine, which is the gene, produces the enzyme. So that's the machine of the body. The end product is the shovel. Things can increase or decrease the activity, right? If there's no fire or if there's a little oxygen, that fire is not going to be working really hard. You're going to have very little output of shovels. You can have a buildup of steel. You have all the steel you want, but you're going to have very few shovels at the end and you're going to go out of business. Now, if you've got a very talented worker who's right there and controlling the fire and they're skilled and they know just how to put in that steel and the right mix of oxygen and heat, then they're going to be producing more shovels. And you're going to increase the activity of that machine. It's going to do well. Now, if that worker stayed up all night and they're a newbie, they're a novice, and they're bored because they're sitting there and they're just letting the stuff come in, and they start getting on their iPhone, and the machine jams up, and the shovel gets stuck in there, now that gene also gets messed up. Those things, increasing, decreasing activity, that's your environment, that's your mindset, it's the chemicals that you're eating, it's the chemicals that you're breathing, it's the things that are accumulating in your body that you can't get rid of. So your genes are constantly in motion and in flux. If I say the word lemon, happening right now in your mouth. Right? A little saliva. That's how fast they work. If I say yawn, oops. Next. But just keep in mind, that's how quickly they work. If you're driving and you see police car lights behind you, you get that immediate sinking feeling, right? And some people, you can make it go away. Other people, that sinking feeling will last them the whole rest of the day. So, yes, we are 99.9% identical, many of us, but there is variation in these genes. But I also want you to understand that folic acid is at the very top, and it has to work its way through every single one of these hoops to get to the bottom, to MTHFR, to then get to 5-methylfolate, this green thing right here. That's a lot of work. Now, we also have things here which slow down the gene, organophosphates. Oh, wow, those are everywhere. 5-FU. Those are drugs that we like to use when we need to. Methotrexate, those are drugs that we need sometimes and don't need oftentimes. Green tea extract, because it's good for everyone, right? Folic acid, unmetabolized, that causes issues. So all these things will speed up and slow down genes, but yet we created folic acid for everyone. You know what? Folic acid can only be incorporated into the cell, because that's where you need nutrients to the job. You swallow a pill, that's step one. Then you have to absorb it. Then you have to get it through the cell membrane. Then it has to work with your cell to get the job done. So folic acid has to be incorporated into the cell, and it can only be done by the first gene that touches it, which is DHFR. Now look at the bottom citation. There's two. Well, it's one actually. In 19 base pair deletion, basically a problem in this gene is associated with increased unprocessed folic acid in the blood and decreased cellular folate. Oh, there's a variation in this first gene here. So how many of us in this room have a variation in that very first gene? This gene is probably as important as MTHFR, but no one discusses it. This is an extremely common variant in the population. DHFR is. Does 23andMe test it? No. I'm gonna. It's big time. MTHFD1, the next one here, right? This one, MTHFD1. Very common. Many, many people have it. 70 times increased risk of fatty liver. 70 times. I have it. I have liver issues. Had liver issues. And I have MTHFR. And I have SLC up in the top, which is what carries your folate. And so does my son, who would be absolutely 110% autistic if it wasn't for me taking interventions. The extremely slow DHFR gene in human liver and its implication for high folic acid intake. There is a 5-fold variation in DHFR activity among human samples. Human DHFR activity is less than 2% of the activity of a rat's DHFR. Human DHFR is only 2% of the speed of a rat's. What does that mean? All those studies that were done to see if we can put folic acid into our food is legitimate or not, they used rats, and their gene is different than ours. Yeah, they're similar, right? You and I are really similar. Rats are pretty similar. Pretty similar isn't good enough. 99.9% isn't good enough. I want 100%. I want individualism back into the world. Public health, fantastic. But with our technology today, with the nutrients that we have today, the food, all that, we can go back to individualized medicine, precision medicine. No problem. It's fast, it's easy. No problem. But yet, they keep putting folic acid everywhere, and it irritates me. I was reviewing my slides again last night. I shouldn't have done that because I got all worked up. Couldn't fall asleep. So, unmetabolized folic acid. What is that? It's folic acid. It's folic acid. What is unmetabolized folic acid? That means that its folic acid is absolutely synthetic, does absolutely no physiological benefit to your body at all until it's processed by what gene? DHFR. Have we even touched MTHFR yet? No. I thought you were the MTHFR guy. So did I. But I kind of looked around more. So 15 minutes after a 220 microgram dose of folic acid, what's the RDA of folic acid? 400 micrograms. So half the RDA in a non-pregnant woman, which is 800 micrograms. And if you have recurrent miscarriage, you know what? Let's give you a ton of it, and we'll give you 5 grams of it. 5 milligrams, excuse me. 4 milligrams. 4 milligrams, still a lot. So 15 minutes after a 220 microgram dose, which is half of the RDA, which is half of the minimal amount that you need, 80% of that was left in your body as folic acid. 80%. Okay? The human gut thus appears to have a limited ability to reduce folic acid. That's fine, right? The authors suggested that chronic exposure to folic acid in physiologic doses, which is 400 micrograms, you know, physiologic, you think Orthomolecular Institute, you're thinking major milligram doses, you know, let's give people a ton of it. No, 220 micrograms, but 400 micrograms is inducing saturation of the enzyme, meaning the DHFR enzyme can't work anymore, right? I've got 2 hands. I was carrying 2 of my kids. The third boy goes, hey, Dad, carry me too. I'm saturated. I can't. Use your own legs. So that DHFR is saturated at a tiny, tiny amount. They detected unmetabolized folic acid in 96 to 98% of the people, children and adults. So if you're consuming any type of processed foods or any type of supplements that contain folic acid, you are most likely in the 90th percentile of having unmetabolized folic acid in your body. That's not a big deal. It's allowed by public health. There's tons of evidence that it's beneficial. Well, there's SNPs. And SNPs, when they occur inside of a regulatory region near a gene, they may play a more direct role in disease by affecting the gene's function, i.e. speeding it up or slowing it down. Just think of it like that. There's a slight variation in a gene that makes it work not so effectively. And there's about 1.5 million of them. And every one of us have about 40 to 50, 60,000 of them. Most of them are benign. Most of them are benign. MTHFR, not so benign. You go into PubMed, National Library of Medicine, and you type in MTHFR, and you get migraines, carotid stiffness, you get leukemia, you get rheumatoid arthritis, neural tube defects, hypertension. Whoa, that's 5 out of thousands of papers. Now, all of these aren't positive associations. Some of them say it's not related, some say there's no evidence, some say it's very related. Now, I say, okay, if there's papers that say it's very related, and then they keep saying it, and there's multiple papers, there's peer reviews and case reviews and all these things, meta-analyses, and they keep saying, you know what, this is pretty significant. Well, why don't we do something about it? Again, it's all about the capacity to do work. A SNP just alters the speed in which that gene or the enzyme works. Just think of it like that. How efficient are you? When you wake up in the morning without your coffee, how efficient are you? When you have your coffee, are you better? So it's the same thing. Genes have their efficiencies. I had to stop drinking completely because I would wake up the next day and I felt slower. I just didn't feel good. And when I drink, I knew all the science. I knew all my genes were struggling with it. I knew I was giving them more work to do. So I said, you know what? I have a 70% reduced capacity in my MTHFR gene because I have 2 significant SNPs in it. So I said, if I give my SNP, my gene, less work, because I have 30% capacity of it remaining, that's pretty good, then I'll give it less work. I stopped drinking. Well, was it hard? Not really, especially when you're an introvert like me, you don't go out to parties much. So why MTHFR? That's a SNP in the communication between Microsoft and Apple. So why do we have MTHFR? Why? I mean, humans have been around for a long time, and a lot of people think that humans have been around on the planet for a long time. Some don't. But why would there be a natural selection for MTHFR? We think of MTHFR as bad. I thought of MTHFR as bad. And then after I kept working with it for some time, I was like, you know, wait a minute. Maybe it's good. Maybe it's selected for a reason. And if you look at MTHFR, it's at the bottom, right? It's down here, right there. There's a lot going on up here, right? There's a lot of stuff going on up here. What's this? ATP, 10-formal tetrahydrofolate, which is a form of folate, goes over here and makes your purines of adenosine and guanosine. You need your ATP for what? Everything. Go for a run, you're burning your ATP. You're done with your run, you're using your ATP to process fuel in your body. You're using it to, i.e. food. You're using it to get rid of chemicals. You're using it to create methylation reactions. You're using it for everything. You don't have ATP, you're dead. GTP. You need GTP to help make your neurotransmitters in your brain. Some people know about biopterin. Well, GTP is the precursor. It's the first step to making your biopterin, which is used for your norepinephrine, your serotonin, your dopamine, your epinephrine, and your nitric oxide, which is running your entire cardiovascular system. So yeah, those are pretty important. We're not done yet. Then you have this step right here, 5,10-methylene tetrahydrofolate, which goes over here. What's that? That's the TYMS gene. What's that do? Oh, it makes your thymine base for your DNA. Thymine is for your DNA, so it converts uracil to thymine. You can test people's uracil levels, and you can test their thymine levels. The accuracy of it, I don't know, I haven't investigated it, but you can actually do this. It's a commonly done thing for some doctors. And so if your thymine levels are low, then you can immediately say, okay, well, their natural folates are low because they're not getting enough 5,10-methylene tetrahydrofolate. So let's say MTHFR wasn't around. It wasn't in existence. What happens? Well, it's just burning through all these upstream folates and making 5-methylfolate right here, okay? But that just supports methylation. So you have to use other folates for different things. So I think in a sunny environment, which I showed earlier, hot, sunny environment, you burn your skin. What skin? DNA. You gotta make my skin back, right? I gotta repair it. So that's just one such example. Now let's say you don't have MTHFR SNPs. Well, dihydrofolate is a potent inhibitor of MTHFR, and high intake of folic acid may exert an antagonistic effect towards natural folates due to the accumulation of dihydrofolate, which is known to inhibit the gene for making your thymine and your DNA bases, oops, and MTHFR, which is needed to support your methylation, oops. And where is that? Here's your dihydrofolate right here. It inhibits this gene and this gene. You have no SNPs. Say you have no SNPs in those genes. Let's say I make this genetic test, which you can get later, and you go through and they're like, yes, I don't have SNPs. But if you're consuming folic acid, it's the same effect, or worse. The folate receptor has a higher affinity for folic acid than for methylfolate. And methylfolate is the main form that circulates in our blood. So what? Can you sit in your garage with the doors closed, the windows down, and a hose on your exhaust pipe into your cab of your car? No. Why? You'll die of carbon monoxide poisoning. Why? Carbon monoxide binds to your hemoglobin 200 times more effectively than oxygen. So in the environment where you have carbon monoxide, that binds preferentially to your hemoglobin over oxygen. Synthetic, man-made, trash folic acid binds to your natural cells, receptors, and transport proteins better than the natural folates. Oops. It is also not known why a substantial proportion of women who take folic acid supplements in the preconception and during pregnancy still have babies with neural tube defects. Neural tube defects in folate, case far from closed. Nature, 2006. Neural tube defects, looking at the genes, is a huge Navigator website. 190 genes have been reported with neural tube defects. MTHFR number 1 with over 132 publications, 11 meta-analyses. Should we use folic acid? No. All these genes are associated with neural tube defects. These are the top 15 genes that have been looked at in the research. We are paying researchers all this money, and they're dedicating their lives to it, and no one's reading it. They're ignoring it. University of Washington, top medical school in the nation. Yes. And they don't read. Look. This is readily available. You can buy this now. It's not expensive. You can buy this too. You can even get it as a drug. You can get both as drugs. Screw the supplement companies. Make them pharmaceutical drugs. I don't care. Start using them. Stop using the folic acid. It has to go through all these things that blocks and gums up people's machinery and results in miscarriages and ruins people's lives. It's bad. Now you can see why I didn't sleep last night. This is powerful. Look at this. Mothers who have a significant MTHFR problem have a 60% increase of giving birth to an infant with neural tube defects. Homozygous offsprings themselves. Mom and dad, they could be heterozygous. They could have one copy. Baby gets unlucky. They become homozygous. They have a 90% increased risk. Mom's taking a prenatal with 800 micrograms of folic acid. That will carry it, right? Nope. Transport of folates is done by folate receptors. Okay? But what binds to these better than natural folates? So folic acid in the blood might inhibit the transport of the body's most preferential form of folate into the brain. And it will do the same into the breast milk. Does the same to breast milk too. The breast is best, but not when there's folic acid in it. Look at this, cerebral folate deficiency. It's defined as any neurological syndrome associated with low CSF concentration of methylfolate in the presence of normal peripheral folate status. You go to the doctor, you get normal blood levels of folate, right? Serum folate, fine. In fact, it's even high. But in your brain, there's a low level of methylfolate. Who's testing that? No one, very, very few. It has a wide clinical presentation beginning around 4 months of age with irritability and sleep disturbances. My kids were angels. Never had any irritation or sleep disturbances, right? And adults. Now, these can be followed by psychomotor issues, visual disturbances, hearing loss. Identification of cerebral folate deficiency is achieved by determining 5-methylfolate concentration in the CSF. Now, look at this. Look at this. Supplementation with folic acid is contraindicated and, if used, may exacerbate the methylfolate deficiency. Wow. Wow. Right? How is this stuff even anywhere? It's everywhere. This is phenomenal. 2010. Inheritable Metabolic Disorders Journal. Okay? What to take? Well, let's take a gummy with some folic acid in it. And they didn't even put folate on there. They just put folic acid because that's what people want, 800 micrograms. No. Look, you need to read this. Folate, inside the parentheses, methylfolate. Calcium folate is the other naturally preferred form of folate. Now, why do they call it quatrefolate? Because everybody is confused around folate. Everyone's confused around folate. Even the manufacturers of methylfolate are confused about folate. And they branded their product as quatrefolate, not quatrefolate. Does it work? Hugo knows it works. Hugo, it worked. She didn't like her leafy greens. She didn't eat it. She just loved her soups that were meat-based. She had choline, which was great, but she did not get her leafy greens. So she took a lot more methylfolate and folinic acid. These papers you can read on your own time because we're running out of time, but methylfolate increases plasma folates more effectively than folic acid. And why wouldn't you want to take the more bioavailable form of any nutrient if it guarantees the end result, right? It's readily available. Now, I get that folic acid was created at the time when we didn't know about genetics. That's fantastic. I get it. It helped people. But now we've moved on. We had horse and buggies many, many years ago. We still getting around with horses and buggies? No. Okay? We've moved on. We got Ubers. That's how I got here today. Low maternal folate status is causally related to neural tube defects. 5-methylfolate is the predominant natural form that is readily available for the transport and metabolism. So let's wake up. Let's stop using horses and buggies, unless you're on vacation and it's cool and you want a photo op. But switch to something that is betterly available and get it from your leafy greens. Food as medicine first, as our ancestors once did, and go on vacation more. Thank you.